What if the fairy tale was a facade? What if the prince who walked away from his royal crown, who abandoned centuries of tradition for the woman he loved, now stood face to face with the most devastating betrayal of all? Imagine it. A man once adored for his loyalty, now whispering words that could shatter the world's perception of his marriage. Meghan destroyed my life. Can you feel the sting of those words? Do you hear the weight in them? This isn't a tabloid headline. This isn't gossip from a Sunday paper. This is the crack of a marriage that was supposed to redefine the monarchy, exposing itself in the most humiliating way possible. And at the center of it all, a rumor that has lingered like a shadow, whispered in palace corridors, speculated on by tabloids, dissected in hushed conversations online. The bodyguard. For years, people wondered if Meghan's connection with one of her personal protectors was more than just professional. For years, Harry dismissed it, raged against the press, called it lies. And yet, time has a way of breaking through even the strongest defenses. Because now, Harry himself has admitted, not everything about those whispers was false. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let me ask you this. If the very foundation of trust between a husband and wife crumbles, what remains? Can love survive betrayal? Or does it morph into a weapon, each side ready to use secrets, confessions, and threats to destroy the other? That's the haunting truth behind this story. And today, we dive deep into it. Deeper than the tabloids dared to go, deeper than the palace ever wanted you to hear. Because this isn't just about Meghan and Harry. It's about loyalty, power, and the devastating cost of secrets. Think back to the wedding, the carriage ride, the veil, the choir, the millions watching worldwide. Remember the headlines. The modern royal couple. A new era for the monarchy. People cried watching it. People believed in it. A fairy tale for the 21st century. But how quickly do fairy tales rot when reality sets in? Within months, the cracks began showing. Meghan accused the palace of cruelty. Harry lashed out at the press. Whispers spread that Meghan isolated Harry from his family, pulled him across the ocean, and now we face the most sinister rumor yet. A rumor that, if true, doesn't just tarnish Meghan's image. It destroys the very core of their marriage. You see, the bodyguard wasn't just anyone. In the world of royalty, bodyguards aren't distant strangers. They live in the couple's shadow. They hear the fights. They see the tears. They're there when no one else is. They guard the most intimate spaces, sometimes even closer than family. And when whispers of Meghan growing too close to one of these men began surfacing, Harry's world began to tilt. He denied it, of course. He had to. To admit it would mean admitting that the woman he gave up his entire identity for had been unfaithful, not just to him, but to the role he sacrificed everything to uphold. But here's the thing. Denials don't erase suspicion. They don't silence the voices late at night, asking, what if it's true? They don't erase the images. Meghan smiling a little too warmly, the bodyguard leaning a little too close. And the public noticed. The press noticed. More importantly, Harry noticed. Do you see the irony? This is the man who waged war on the tabloids, who claimed the British press had hounded his mother to death, who painted himself as the defender of his wife's honor against the lies of Fleet Street. And yet now, he finds himself echoing the same words they hinted at years ago. Isn't it chilling? Isn't it devastating? Let's pause for a second. Imagine being Harry. You've stood in front of the world, defending Meghan at every turn, cutting ties with your brother, with your father, with your homeland, all because you believed in her. And then, quietly, slowly, she chips away at your trust. Not publicly, not dramatically, but in private whispers, in rumors that simply refuse to die. And one day, in a moment of vulnerability, you admit, even if just to a friend, that those rumors weren't entirely false. That you feel destroyed. Destroyed. That's the word he used. Not hurt, not angry, not betrayed. Destroyed. It paints a picture, doesn't it? A man hollowed out. A man who realizes the pedestal he built for his wife has become his own prison. And let's not forget, this story doesn't exist in isolation. Meghan and Harry's relationship has always been surrounded by drama. Netflix deals, Spotify disasters, lawsuits, estrangement from the royals. But this is different. Because scandals about money or media can be brushed off. Scandals about affairs? About betrayal within a marriage? Those cut deeper. Those hit where it hurts most. Those stick forever. Now, here's where you need to pay close attention. Why does this matter right now? Why is this coming out in whispers and leaks now, years after the rumor first surfaced? Because timing is everything in the royal world. When marriages collapse, when legacies are at stake, when one person feels cornered, that's when secrets spill. And right now, Meghan and Harry are under more pressure than ever. Their Hollywood projects struggle. Their reputation is shaky. Their royal ties are severed. And in the middle of that chaos, Harry admits the unthinkable. I want you to think about this as if it were a puzzle. The missing pieces have been scattered across the years. Little hints, small contradictions, Meghan's carefully curated interviews, Harry's moments of bitterness. When you put those pieces together, you see the outline of a story that was hiding in plain sight. But what do you think? Was Meghan's relationship with her bodyguard truly inappropriate? Or was it a desperate rumor fueled by jealous courtiers and hungry tabloids? Did Harry truly believe his wife betrayed him? Or was he a broken man searching for an excuse for his own misery? These are the questions we'll peel back in this exposé. And make no mistake, this isn't the end of the road. Because the photographs that surfaced, the images that first gave this rumor life, those tell a story of their own. A story that could no longer be buried, no matter how hard Harry and Meghan tried. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every scandal has an origin story. Every whisper, every headline, every shocking revelation begins with a single spark. And in the case of Meghan Markle's alleged bodyguard affair, that spark flickered years before Harry ever uttered the words that would rattle the foundations of his marriage. To understand how we got here, to truly grasp the weight of Harry's confession, "Meghan destroyed my life," we have to go back to where it all began. To the shadows, the whispers, and the strange coincidences that turned into something far darker than anyone expected. Ask yourself this: how does a rumor take root? Is it born from truth, or is it planted like a seed by those who stand to gain from its growth? Was Meghan the victim of palace scheming, a woman smeared because she dared to be different? Or was she hiding a secret so explosive that the institution itself trembled at the thought of it being exposed? From the earliest days of Meghan's entry into royal life, she was surrounded by suspicion. Not because of her background, not just because of her Hollywood past, but because of the way she seemed to bend rules and test boundaries. Royal watchers noticed immediately Meghan wasn't like the others. She didn't fade into the background. She didn't play the part of the silent duchess. She commanded attention, and she wielded it like a weapon. But with power comes enemies. And with enemies comes whispers. The first whispers about Meghan and her bodyguard didn't make front-page news at first. They circulated in the corridors of Kensington Palace, exchanged between staff members who had seen just a little too much. A hand placed a second too long on an arm. A glance that carried something unspoken. Late-night calls that didn't quite fit the pattern of professional duty. You see, palace staff are trained to notice these things. They live in a world where every detail matters. A forgotten umbrella, a misplaced word, a meeting held at the wrong time. And when details start piling up, the stories begin to write themselves. Here's the irony. Meghan had come into the royal family determined to modernize it, to prove that love could conquer centuries of tradition. Yet from the very beginning, the very institution she was trying to change was cataloging her every move. And what they saw raised eyebrows. Let's pause. Imagine you're Harry in those early days. Newly married, deeply in love, the world captivated by your union. And yet, behind the palace walls, people are whispering. She spends too much time with him. Did you see the way she smiled at him? Why does she need to meet privately with her protection officer? Can you imagine the fury building in Harry? The man who despised gossip more than anything. The man who believed the press had killed his mother, now hearing the same kinds of insinuations aimed at his wife. But here's the problem. Whispers are hard to ignore when they keep multiplying. And they did multiply. Every time Meghan was seen laughing just a little too comfortably, every time her bodyguard lingered just a step too close, the narrative grew. And once the press caught even a whiff of it, they ran with it. Not blatantly. Oh no, they were far too clever for that. Instead, they dropped hints. Cryptic headlines about unusual closeness. Photos taken from angles that told half a story but suggested a whole scandal. And then there's this. Do you remember how quickly Meghan went through royal staff? Assistants resigning, communications officers quitting, bodyguards being reassigned. The turnover was astonishing, unprecedented even. At the time, it was spun as Meghan being difficult, a demanding boss, a clash of cultures between Hollywood and the palace. But what if there was another reason? What if those closest to her saw something they couldn't unsee? Now, let's add another layer. The British royal family has always had scandals involving the help. From Princess Diana's rumored affairs to Fergie's infamous toe-sucking debacle, it's almost a grim tradition. So when Meghan's name began circulating alongside whispers of a bodyguard, the story wasn't just juicy, it was believable. Too believable. And it wasn't just the palace staff whispering. The tabloids began probing, piecing together fragments. They noticed Meghan and Harry traveling with different security arrangements than expected. They noticed changes in personnel. And most damningly, they noticed the way Meghan's body language shifted when certain individuals were around her. Subtle? Yes. But to the trained eye, undeniable. This is where the story takes a darker turn. Because rumors alone don't destroy marriages. But suspicion? Suspicion eats away at trust like rust on iron. Even if Meghan was entirely innocent, even if her relationship with her bodyguard was nothing more than professional, the very existence of the rumor was enough to poison her marriage. Harry was a man predisposed to paranoia, haunted by the ghosts of his past, scarred by the press's treatment of his mother. He didn't need proof. He just needed doubt. And doubt had already sunk its claws deep. So ask yourself, what would you do if you were Harry? Defend Meghan with every fiber of your being, knowing deep down there's a chance you're defending a lie. Or confront her, risking the collapse of the marriage you sacrificed everything for? That's the impossible position Harry found himself in. And according to insiders, his temper flared often. Meghan would deny, Harry would rage. And in the end, nothing was resolved, only buried deeper, waiting to explode. Let's not forget the bodyguard himself. In this origin story, he is the most silent, most dangerous character. Because silence, in scandals like this, speaks louder than words. He never issued clear denials. He never stepped into the spotlight to protect Meghan. Instead, he faded quietly, reassigned, replaced, moved out of view. Was this the palace protecting Meghan? Or was it the palace protecting itself? Think about it. The royal family thrives on control. If there was even the smallest chance of scandal, wouldn't it be easier to remove the player from the board than risk exposure? That's what makes this so chilling. Because whether Meghan was guilty or innocent, the decision to quietly shuffle people around suggests that someone, somewhere, believed there was a problem. And this, right here, is where the rumor found its legs. Because once a story begins to align with palace actions, sudden resignations, reassignments, whispers of personal issues, the public doesn't need proof. The pieces connect themselves. But here's the question I'll leave you with. Was this all coincidence? Was Meghan a victim of a hostile palace, a media machine determined to cast her as unfaithful? Or did these whispers have roots in something real, something Harry himself could never quite ignore? Because the moment the photographs surfaced, the images that would ignite the scandal into a full-blown firestorm, the whispers became undeniable. And those photographs told a story of their own, one that no denial could erase. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. One image can destroy an entire fairy tale. Just one snapshot, captured at the wrong moment, can undo years of carefully curated smiles, crafted narratives, and polished interviews. That's exactly what happened with Meghan Markle and the bodyguard rumors. For years, it was whispers. For years, it was speculation. But the moment the photographs hit the press, the scandal transformed from quiet suspicion into explosive headlines. Because pictures don't lie, or at least, that's what the world was led to believe. So let's go back. The setting, a public engagement. Meghan, dazzling as always, dressed immaculately, her every move scrutinized by cameras and crowds. Behind her, beside her, just a half-step too close, stood the man who would change the course of her marriage story, her bodyguard. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. After all, it's their job to be there, to hover near, to protect. But photographs are dangerous things. They capture what the human eye might miss. A hand brushing a shoulder. A glance held 1 second too long. A smile that seemed too private, too knowing. Do you remember the first time you saw them? Maybe it was splashed across a tabloid front page. Maybe it was circulating online with 1,000 conspiracy threads attached. Side-by-side images of Meghan and her protector leaning in just a little too close. Meghan's eyes flashing with a smile that didn't seem meant for the cameras or for Harry. The bodyguard's posture, not stiff, not detached, but engaged. Intimate, even. And suddenly, the whispers had proof. Or did they? That's the sinister beauty of photographs. They show everything and nothing at the same time. Meghan could argue, and she did, that the images were innocent, moments twisted by a hungry press. But once those pictures were out, there was no going back. They couldn't be unseen. They couldn't be erased. And Harry? Harry saw them too. Now imagine being him. Imagine flipping through the paper or having aides nervously show you what the world was talking about. Imagine recognizing the man in those photos, the man assigned to protect your wife, now immortalized in print as the center of scandal. Imagine knowing that millions of people were analyzing your wife's smile, her glance, her body language, asking whether she was loyal or whether she was laughing at you behind your back. Can you picture the humiliation, the fury, the sting of betrayal, whether real or imagined? Here's where it gets even more complicated. Body language experts were dragged onto television, paid to analyze every frame. Notice how Meghan's torso tilts toward him. See the way he's positioned to shield her from others. It suggests more than just protection. The experts became part of the circus, dissecting millimeters of movement, selling interpretations that only inflamed the public imagination. And the audience ate it up. Because who doesn't love a scandal involving forbidden closeness? But ask yourself, were they really seeing the truth? Or were they seeing what they wanted to see? Isn't it possible that Meghan was simply being Meghan, warm, charismatic, naturally charming, and the bodyguard, well, simply doing his job? Isn't it possible the entire world projected their fantasies and suspicions onto a handful of still images? And yet, timing is everything. These photographs didn't appear during a moment of marital bliss. They surfaced when Harry and Meghan's relationship with the palace was already strained, when they were under scrutiny, when every misstep was magnified. That timing gave the images power. They weren't just pictures, they were evidence, confirmation of what people already suspected. The tabloids knew exactly what they were doing. The headlines were carefully crafted, not outright accusations, but sly insinuations. Too close for comfort? Protecting or something more? These weren't statements. They were questions designed to make the reader answer in their own minds. And once the seed was planted, it grew. Do you see how clever it was? They never had to prove anything. The photographs did the work for them. Meghan and the bodyguard leaning in. Meghan's smile. The look in his eyes. The angles carefully chosen. Suddenly, a picture that could have been dismissed as nothing was transformed into a symbol of betrayal. And what about Harry? Sources close to him say that these images ignited furious arguments behind closed doors. Harry raged at the press, calling them liars, vultures. But rage at the press is one thing. What about rage at Meghan? According to insiders, the photos became a recurring trigger in their fights. Harry couldn't forget them, couldn't ignore them. Every time the rumors resurfaced, those images flashed in his mind. It wasn't just about the photographs. It was about what they represented. Doubt. And doubt is poison in any marriage. But here's the cruel twist. Meghan knew exactly how to handle it in public. She laughed off the rumors. She dismissed the photographs as manipulations. In interviews, she turned the narrative into one of victimhood, a woman unfairly hounded by the press, painted as unfaithful when all she was guilty of was existing in the public eye. It worked. Many believed her. Many defended her. And yet, behind the scenes, Harry's faith in her was eroding piece by piece. Let me ask you, have you ever seen something you couldn't unsee? A text, a glance, a picture that left you questioning everything? That's what these photographs did to Harry. Even if Meghan was innocent, even if the relationship with her bodyguard was purely professional, the images spoke louder than words. They burned themselves into his memory. And once burned, they stayed. And the story doesn't end with those first pictures. Because the press didn't stop there. More images surfaced. More suggestive headlines. More speculation. Each time, Harry's fury grew. Each time, Meghan's defenses sharpened. And each time, the marriage strained under the weight of suspicion. But here's where the story turns once again. Because Meghan wasn't the only one being watched. Harry's reaction, his rage, his paranoia, his obsession with the photographs, began to leak out too. Friends whispered about his temper. Palace aides hinted at screaming matches. And slowly, the narrative shifted. Maybe it wasn't Meghan who was guilty. Maybe it was Harry, paranoid, broken, unable to trust the woman he loved. Do you see the trap here? The photographs didn't just accuse Meghan. They accused Harry too. They accused him of weakness, of jealousy, of being a man destroyed by his own insecurity. That's the power of an image. It doesn't just tell one story, it tells many. And yet, even as Meghan denied and Harry defended, one thing was certain. The photographs had changed everything. The whispers were no longer whispers. The rumor was no longer invisible. It had a face, a body, a set of images the world could point to. But here's the question that haunted Harry most. What if the photographs weren't lies? What if what the world saw in those frozen moments was the truth he didn't want to face? Because when Harry confronted Meghan about those images, the fight that followed would tear a hole in their marriage that could never truly be repaired. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the walls of a marriage become a battleground? When love turns into suspicion, and suspicion ignites into rage. That's exactly where Harry found himself in the aftermath of those photographs. Outwardly, he remained the devoted husband, defending Meghan in interviews, railing against the press, presenting the united front that had become their brand. But behind closed doors, it was a very different story. The walls of their Montecito mansion, and before that, the rooms of Kensington Palace, echoed with shouting, slammed doors, and the anguished voice of a man who had given up everything, only to wonder if he had been made a fool. Let's be clear, Harry is no stranger to anger. We've seen flashes of it his whole life. The grief of losing his mother at 12, the resentment toward the paparazzi, the outbursts at journalists who dared to question Meghan. His rage has always been both his shield and his curse. But now, that rage wasn't just pointed at outsiders. It was pointed at Meghan herself. Sources close to the couple have painted a picture of fiery, relentless arguments. Harry, fists clenched, voice raised, demanding explanations. Meghan, calm at first, then sharp, dismissing his accusations as paranoia. Imagine those moments. Harry pacing the room, waving the tabloid pages in the air, demanding, "What is this? Why does it look like that?" Meghan rolling her eyes, sighing, insisting, "It's nothing. He's a bodyguard, Harry. That's his job." But is that enough? Can you imagine hearing the same explanation over and over while the images, the whispers, the rumors refuse to leave your head? The human mind doesn't let go of suspicion so easily. And Harry's mind, already scarred by betrayal and loss, became a breeding ground for doubt. Let me ask you, have you ever had an argument where no matter what the other person says, it doesn't calm you? Instead, every word just makes you angrier? That's the cycle Harry and Meghan found themselves trapped in. His anger feeding her defensiveness feeding his anger, until neither one of them could escape the loop. Here's where it gets darker. Those close to Harry say his anger wasn't just about Meghan. It was about himself. The shame of possibly being wronged. The humiliation of imagining the world laughing at him. The prince who left everything for love, only to be betrayed. That humiliation is unbearable for any man. But for a man raised in the public eye, under the constant gaze of cameras, it was a torment beyond words. And Meghan knew it. She knew Harry's vulnerabilities. She knew how deeply he hated being mocked. That's why, according to insiders, she often turned the tables. Instead of soothing his suspicions, she accused him of being paranoid, of being weak, of letting the press control his mind. Can you picture that? The man who tried to escape the crown, now being told he couldn't even escape his own insecurities. But Harry's fury wasn't just emotional. It was physical in its intensity. He slammed doors. He stormed out of rooms. He smashed glasses in fits of rage. He shouted until his voice cracked. And then, moments later, he'd collapse into silence, head in his hands, broken by the very storm he'd unleashed. The cycle was endless. It's important to remember something here. The royal family has always prized composure, the stiff upper lip, the ability to remain calm no matter what. Harry, however, never mastered that art. He was the boy who wore his heart on his sleeve, the man who let his emotions pour out in raw, unfiltered bursts. And Meghan? Meghan had grown up in a world where performance was everything. Calm on camera, sharp behind the scenes. She knew how to maintain control. Harry didn't. That imbalance made every argument more brutal. Harry lost control. Meghan stayed composed. And the more composed she was, the more enraged he became. Think about it. Nothing fuels fury like the sense that your pain isn't being taken seriously. Now, consider this contradiction. Publicly, Harry was the knight in shining armor, defending Meghan against every slight. Privately, he was questioning her loyalty, demanding answers she refused to give. Do you see the irony? The man who lectured the world on protecting his wife was, in private, consumed by the possibility she had betrayed him. The arguments weren't just about the photographs, either. They were about every little thing the bodyguard did. Every late-night call, every private meeting, every unexplained change in security staff. Each one became another match thrown onto the fire. And Meghan, instead of putting it out, often fanned the flames. She hated being questioned. She despised the idea of being interrogated by her own husband. So she pushed back. Hard. And here's the devastating part. Staff heard it. Staff saw it. Palace aides, personal assistants, even friends of the couple began to talk about the fights. Whispers of shouting matches leaking into the night. Accounts of Harry storming out, only to return hours later, still seething. The private breakdown of their marriage was no longer private. It had witnesses. And in the royal world, witnesses mean one thing: leaks. Can you imagine the humiliation for Harry? His worst fear wasn't just that Meghan might have betrayed him. It was that the world would find out. That his private misery would become public entertainment. And in many ways, it already had. The tabloids fed on it. The public speculated about it. And Harry, once again, was the boy trapped in the glare of a merciless spotlight. But here's the cruel twist. Anger, as destructive as it is, can also bind people together. As much as Harry and Meghan fought, they also clung to each other in the aftermath. Harry's fury would break him, Meghan would console him, and for a moment, they'd find closeness again. But it never lasted, because the root of the problem was never solved. The suspicion remained. The photographs remained. The whispers remained. And each time the cycle repeated, Harry sank deeper into a private torment. His fury wasn't just anger anymore, it was despair. A despair that would eventually lead him to utter those words. Words he may never live down. Meghan destroyed my life. But here's the question. Was Meghan simply a woman trapped in an unfair rumor, unfairly accused, defending herself against her husband's paranoia? Or was Harry's fury the reaction of a man who knew, deep down, that the whispers weren't just whispers? The truth is that Meghan wasn't about to sit back and let the bodyguard story define her. No, she had her own counterattack ready. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every scandal sparks a counterattack. Every accusation meets a defense. And Meghan Markle was never the type of woman to stay silent. Never the kind to allow rumors to shape her narrative without a fight. If Harry's fury behind closed doors shook the walls of their marriage, Meghan's defense, carefully calculated, meticulously crafted, was her way of taking control. But here's the twist. Meghan's counter-narrative didn't just defend her. It turned the spotlight back on Harry. And in doing so, it created a new battlefield, one where truth and performance blurred until no one could tell them apart. Think about Meghan's personality for a moment. She isn't shy. She isn't timid. She was an actress long before she was a duchess, trained in the art of performance, in the skill of shaping perception. She understood the power of narrative better than anyone in the royal family. And when the bodyguard rumors threatened to spiral out of control, she did what she always did best. She performed. Not on a stage, not in front of a director, but in the arena of public opinion and behind the closed doors of her marriage. To Harry's anger, Meghan responded with composure. Calm, measured, dismissive. You're imagining things. This is the press twisting reality. Why can't you see what they're doing to us? Do you notice the subtlety? She didn't just deny the rumors. She reframed them. She turned them into evidence, not of her betrayal, but of Harry's paranoia. Clever, isn't it? Because instead of being on trial herself, she placed Harry in the dock, making him question his own judgment, his own sanity. Let me ask you, Have you ever been in an argument where the other person refuses to give you the reaction you want? Where their calmness feels like a dagger, cutting deeper with every word? That's what Meghan did to Harry. She knew his weaknesses. She knew his triggers, and she leaned into them. The more he raged, the calmer she became. The calmer she became, the more irrational he looked. And in a marriage already cracking, that imbalance was lethal. But Meghan didn't stop with Harry. No, her counter-narrative extended outward. Publicly, she leaned into the role of the persecuted Duchess. The interviews, the statements, the subtle jabs, they all painted the same picture. Meghan, the strong woman under attack. Meghan, the outsider battling a cruel press. Meghan, the victim of racism, misogyny, and palace cruelty. And in that story, what place was there for whispers of a bodyguard? None. They were dismissed as part of the same toxic machine that had always tried to destroy her. Do you see the genius in that? She didn't have to deny the rumors outright. She only had to fold them into the larger narrative of persecution. Of course they'd say that about me, she implied. They've been trying to smear me from the very beginning. And the world, already polarized, took sides. Her defenders saw the rumors as further proof of a witch hunt. Her critics saw them as the smoking gun they had always suspected. Meanwhile, Harry was trapped in the middle. Publicly, he had to play the loyal husband, repeating Meghan's narrative, defending her against the press. Privately, he still wrestled with the images, the whispers, the gnawing doubts. Can you imagine the torment? Being forced to stand in front of the world, insisting your wife is innocent, while inside, you're not entirely sure she is? And Meghan? Meghan wielded that duality like a sword. According to insiders, she would mock Harry's suspicions in private, calling him paranoid, weak, even pathetic for letting the press control his mind. Imagine hearing that from the woman you sacrificed your family, your crown, your country for. Imagine being told that your pain, your anger, your humiliation were all in your head. That is how Meghan fought back. Not by silencing the rumor, but by silencing Harry. But here's where the contradiction burns brightest. While Meghan dismissed the rumors, she also demanded absolute loyalty from Harry. She expected him to cut off friends who questioned her. She pushed him to sever ties with family members who raised concerns. Every time Harry showed doubt, she pushed harder, reminding him of the sacrifices he'd already made. We can't turn back now, she'd insist. It's us against the world. And Harry, torn between suspicion and devotion, fell deeper into the trap. This is the brilliance of Meghan's counter-narrative. It wasn't just defense. It was offense. She didn't just deny, she attacked. She turned every criticism into proof of persecution, every doubt into proof of Harry's weakness. And by doing so, she not only shielded herself, she tightened her grip on him. Let's bring it back to you, the audience. What do you think? Was Meghan simply protecting herself, fighting back against a hostile press and a paranoid husband? Or was this something darker, a calculated manipulation, using Harry's vulnerabilities to protect her own secrets? Was she the victim, or was she the master puppeteer? Because here's the twist that no one saw coming. Meghan's calm, her dismissals, her counterattacks, they might have worked on Harry for a while. But what happens when someone outside the marriage, someone who saw too much, decides to speak out? Because one insider did exactly that. And their revelation would throw Meghan's carefully crafted defense into chaos. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every fortress has a weak spot. Every carefully constructed defense has a crack. And for Meghan Markle, that crack appeared not in a headline, not in a photograph, but in the words of someone who had been there, someone who had seen too much. An insider, a staffer, a voice from within the walls of her world. And when that voice spoke, even in whispers, Meghan's counter-narrative began to unravel. Because you can deny a rumor. You can dismiss a photograph. But when a person who lived inside the palace walls begins to talk, the story shifts from speculation to revelation. Picture this. A staff member, long overlooked, finally decides they can no longer remain silent. They don't rush to the tabloids waving evidence. No, it begins more subtly. Hints dropped in conversations with friends, remarks overheard, fragments that eventually make their way into the press. And what do they reveal? That Meghan's relationship with her bodyguard wasn't as professional as she wanted the world to believe. The staffer claimed they had noticed late-night calls, moments that stretched beyond duty. The bodyguard being summoned at odd hours for reasons no one else could understand. Closed-door conversations where no one else was allowed. Lingering glances, private jokes. Harmless? Perhaps. But in the palace, where even a misplaced glance can be dissected, those details were enough to ignite suspicions. Let me ask you, would you trust your spouse alone, repeatedly, with someone they seem to share an unusual bond with? Would you shrug it off as nothing, or would it gnaw at you, day after day? That was Harry's reality, and the staffer's revelations, even whispered, confirmed the very doubts he had been wrestling with. Here's where the irony sharpens. Meghan had spent months dismissing Harry's suspicions as paranoia, convincing him that the rumors were nothing but press invention. Yet here was someone from inside their own household, suggesting otherwise. And the moment Harry heard even a hint of this, his fury reignited, not just against Meghan, but against himself. Had he been the fool all along? Had he defended a lie, sacrificed his family, his crown, his life in Britain, for a woman who may not have been entirely faithful? The insider didn't just stop at whispers of closeness. They hinted at Meghan's growing reliance on this particular bodyguard, not just for security, but for comfort. Imagine that, comfort. A word that slices through the heart of any marriage. Harry was supposed to be her comfort, her protector, her partner. And yet, according to this staffer, Meghan turned elsewhere. And here's the devastating part. The palace knew. Or at least, they suspected. Because once those whispers reached the higher levels of staff, moves were made. The bodyguard's schedule shifted. Assignments changed. Eventually, he was reassigned altogether. Quietly, discreetly. No headlines, no scandal, just a quiet removal, as though erasing him from Meghan's orbit would erase the suspicion. But all it did was confirm it. Because in the royal world, nothing is ever done without reason. And if the palace reshuffles staff, the public assumes the worst. Now, pause for a moment. Imagine Meghan's rage when she discovered someone close to her had talked. The woman who prided herself on controlling her narrative, who had built her public image with precision, suddenly faced betrayal from within. That's why, according to those close to the situation, Meghan lashed out behind the scenes, accusing staff of disloyalty, demanding to know who had spoken. Her fury, in some ways, matched Harry's. But while Harry's anger was rooted in fear of betrayal, Meghan's was rooted in fear of exposure. This is where the story takes on a Shakespearean quality. Because isn't it always the insider, the servant, the aide, the overlooked observer, who topples kings and queens? Isn't it always the one standing quietly in the background who notices the truths the powerful try to hide? That's exactly what happened here. Meghan could fight Harry. She could fight the press. She could even fight the monarchy. But how do you fight the whispers of someone who saw it all with their own eyes? And here's the contradiction. Meghan's entire public persona was built on authenticity. Speaking her truth, living openly, being vulnerable. Yet, when an insider's truth clashed with hers, she dismissed it as betrayal, lies, smear. Do you see the irony? Truth, it seems, only mattered when it was her version. But for Harry, this insider's revelation was devastating. It validated his deepest fears. It gave weight to the photographs, to the whispers, to the gnawing doubt that had never left him. And once doubt becomes validation, it transforms. It becomes certainty. In Harry's mind, the line between rumor and reality blurred until there was no line at all. And the public? The public devoured it. The moment word of the insider's account leaked, tabloids had a field day. Talk shows dissected it. Social media exploded with debates. Some dismissed the staffer as a bitter employee, a pawn in the palace's game. Others saw it as the missing piece, the proof that Meghan's story was not as spotless as she claimed. Let me ask you, what do you believe? Do you think the insider was telling the truth, exposing a secret that Meghan and Harry desperately wanted to hide? Or do you think they were part of a larger plot, feeding the flames of a narrative designed to bring Meghan down? Because here's the chilling part. Meghan had managed to control every other aspect of her story. But this she couldn't control. This came from within. And no amount of calm denial could erase the seed of doubt that had now been planted in Harry's heart and in the world's imagination. But the most shocking revelation wasn't even the staffer's words. It was what Harry himself would eventually admit. An admission that would shatter any illusion of a happy marriage, and confirmed the whispers that Meghan had fought so hard to silence. Because when Harry finally broke his silence, the words that came out of his mouth were more damning than anything the palace, the press, or the staff could ever have said. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When the silence finally breaks, it is never soft. It is never gentle. It comes like thunder, rattling through every corner of the story and shaking everything that came before it. For years, Harry defended Meghan against every whisper, every headline, every accusation. He was her shield, her warrior, the man who gave up his crown to protect the woman he loved. But when the shield itself cracks, when the warrior admits the battle was too much, the world takes notice. And Harry's words, the words no one ever expected to hear, were devastating. It wasn't entirely false. Followed by the even darker confession, Meghan destroyed my life. Let's sit with that for a moment. It wasn't entirely false. Do you feel the weight of those words? Not a full confession, not an outright declaration that Meghan had betrayed him, but enough to pierce the illusion of loyalty. Enough to let the doubt breathe in the open. Enough to change the narrative from rumor to reality. Because once the person at the center of the scandal admits even a sliver of truth, the story takes on a life of its own. So how did it happen? Not in a press conference. Not in an interview. No, Harry's confession came in private. A conversation with a trusted friend, late at night, after too many drinks. The kind of conversation where walls fall, where masks slip, where the truth leaks out because the weight of carrying it has become unbearable. And like all secrets in Harry and Meghan's world, it didn't stay private for long. Insiders talk, friends talk, and soon, the world knew. Imagine the scene. Harry, red-eyed, voice low, admitting he couldn't fight anymore. Admitting that the rumors about Meghan and her bodyguard weren't entirely baseless. That somewhere in the noise, in the photographs, in the whispers, there had been a kernel of truth. Can you imagine the silence in that room when those words fell? Can you imagine the look on the face of the friend who heard them? The realization that the fairy tale was cracking from within? And then came the second blow, the words that would define Harry's pain more than anything else. Meghan destroyed my life. Not the press, not the palace, not the institution he'd spent years criticizing. Meghan, his wife, the woman he had given everything for. The woman he had defended until his relationships with his father and brother lay in ruins. It was her, he admitted, who had broken him. Now, ask yourself, what would drive a man like Harry, a man so fiercely protective, so loyal, so blinded by devotion, to say something so damning? Betrayal? Yes. Humiliation? Certainly. But more than that, despair. The despair of realizing you may have built your entire life on a lie. That every sacrifice you made, the crown, the family, the country, may have been for someone who was never truly yours. Let's not forget the irony. Harry once said publicly that he had found his safe haven in Meghan. That she had saved him from a life of misery. That she had given him the family he always longed for. And now, in private, he confessed the opposite. That the woman who once saved him had destroyed him. That the haven had become a prison. Isn't that the cruelest twist of all? And here's the part that no one saw coming. Harry didn't just say this once. According to those close to him, he repeated it. In moments of weakness, in conversations with old friends, in bitter arguments behind closed doors. She destroyed my life. It became his refrain, his truth, spoken in the shadows, even as he maintained the facade in the light. Now think about Meghan. Imagine her hearing those words, not from Harry directly, but through leaks, whispers, reports that he had said it to others. How would she react? Rage? Denial? Or perhaps fear? Fear that the man who had once been her greatest ally might become her greatest liability. Because if Harry could admit this in private, what was to stop him from admitting it in public? And if he did, what then? This is where the story becomes truly dangerous. Because Meghan's power has always been tied to Harry's loyalty. Without it, without his unwavering defense, she is exposed, vulnerable. And Harry, in his brokenness, in his confession, had cracked the foundation of that power. For the first time, Meghan faced the possibility that Harry might not only fail to defend her, he might become the one who destroyed her. Let's pause and turn to you, the audience. Do you think Harry's confession was a moment of truth, the first time he allowed himself to acknowledge reality? Or do you think it was the outburst of a man drowning in paranoia and insecurity, exaggerating his pain because he could no longer control it? Which version do you believe? The loyal husband who defended Meghan against the world, or the broken man who whispered she had destroyed him? Because whichever version you choose, the fact remains, the words are out there. They cannot be unsaid. They cannot be erased. And once the truth slips into the open, it spreads like wildfire. The palace heard. The press heard. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about Meghan and a bodyguard. It was about Harry, broken, disillusioned, admitting the unthinkable. But here's where the danger truly exploded. Harry's confession didn't just rattle Meghan. It rattled the monarchy. Because if Harry was willing to admit this, if he was willing to break ranks, even against his own wife, what else might he reveal? What other secrets, darker and more damaging, might slip out of his mouth in a moment of despair? That's why the palace scrambled. That's why whispers began of late-night phone calls, of Charles demanding silence, of William warning Harry to control himself. Because Harry's private words weren't just personal, they were political. They threatened not just his marriage, but the monarchy itself. And yet, the greatest storm wasn't brewing in the palace. It was brewing inside Harry's own home. Because Meghan had heard enough. She had defended herself against the press, against the palace, against the world. But now, she had to defend herself against her own husband's words. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace has weathered storms before. Affairs, divorces, scandals, they've been part of royal history for centuries. But this was different. This wasn't whispers from the tabloids or speculation about some distant cousin. This was Harry, a son of the monarchy, a prince of the blood, admitting, even if only in private, that the rumors about Meghan and her bodyguard weren't entirely false. Admitting that his wife had, in his own words, destroyed his life. And for the palace, that wasn't just personal gossip. That was dynamite. Because when a member of the royal family speaks, especially one as high-profile as Harry, the words can shake the very foundations of the crown. Picture the scene inside Buckingham Palace when the whispers of Harry's confession reached the corridors of power. Phones buzzing, advisors scrambling, Charles, furious but cautious, demanding details. William, icy and sharp, warning that this could not, under any circumstances, become public knowledge. And courtiers whispering that if Harry's words leaked into the press, the damage wouldn't just fall on Meghan, it would splash back on the monarchy itself. Because what would it say about the royal family if the man they once celebrated as a symbol of modern love now admitted he had been ruined by it? Let's not forget, the monarchy's survival has always been tied to image. Diana's interviews in the 90s nearly toppled it. Andrew's scandal left it reeling. And now, Harry's confession threatened to ignite a firestorm that could burn them all. This is why the reaction inside the palace was so ruthless, so immediate. According to insiders, Charles insisted on silence. No statements, no comments, nothing that could fuel the flames. The strategy? Contain the damage. Pretend the whispers didn't exist. But William? William's reaction was colder. He reportedly told Harry in no uncertain terms, "If you can't control yourself, you'll destroy what's left of this family." Can you imagine those words? Two brothers, once inseparable, now reduced to icy threats. William, the heir, protecting the crown. Harry, the spare, spiraling into a confession that endangered them all. The divide couldn't have been clearer. Here's the irony. Meghan had always been painted by the palace as the problem, the difficult duchess, the outsider who couldn't adapt. But now, Harry himself was becoming the liability. His own words, his own despair, were more dangerous than any action Meghan could take. And the palace, which had once sought to control her, now realized they needed to control him. But how do you control a man who has already walked away? How do you silence a prince who has nothing left to lose? That was the dilemma Charles and William faced. If they attacked him publicly, they risked confirming the rumors. If they ignored him, the whispers might grow louder. The monarchy was trapped, and it was Harry who had trapped them. And here's where the situation turned even darker. Whispers began circulating that palace officials floated the idea of a brutal ultimatum. If Harry couldn't be silenced, if his confessions kept slipping into the public sphere, there would be consequences. Legal action, financial repercussions, even the possibility, whispered but never confirmed, of stripping titles. Can you imagine it? Harry, already estranged, threatened with losing the very thing that still tied him to the institution, his dukedom, his royal status. Let me ask you, do you think that would have stopped him? Do you think threatening a man who already felt destroyed, who already believed his life had been ruined, would make him obedient? Or would it only fuel his anger, pushing him further toward the edge? Because Harry wasn't the only one facing palace fury. Meghan herself became the subject of harsh words behind closed doors. Some courtiers allegedly compared her to Wallis Simpson, the American woman who had once thrown the monarchy into crisis. Others called her dangerous, manipulative, a threat to the institution's stability. And while Charles may have avoided saying it outright, the implication was clear. Meghan was now the scapegoat, the convenient villain who could take the blame if Harry spiraled out of control. But here's the contradiction. For all their fury, for all their whispered threats, the palace also feared Meghan. Why? Because they knew she wasn't defenseless. Meghan had her own weapons, her interviews, her influence, and, if the rumors were true, her files, recordings, emails, secrets that could devastate the royal image if ever released. Which meant the monarchy couldn't simply cast her aside. They had to tread carefully. So what did they do? They circled the wagons. Behind closed doors, they tightened control, limited access, and prepared for damage control. They reminded senior staff never to comment on the bodyguard rumors, never to repeat Harry's words, never to acknowledge anything. Silence became their weapon. Because in the royal family, silence isn't weakness. Silence is strategy. But here's where the tension becomes unbearable. Meghan wasn't going to stay silent. Meghan never stays silent. And if the palace thought they could contain the firestorm by closing ranks, they underestimated the woman at the center of it all. Because Meghan wasn't about to let the bodyguard scandal define her. She had her own countermove ready. A move designed not only to defend herself, but to turn the tables on the palace, on Harry, and on anyone who dared to question her. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Meghan Markle has never been a woman who plays defense for long. If the palace thought they could box her in, if Harry thought his whispered confession would weaken her grip, they were mistaken. Because when Meghan feels cornered, she doesn't retreat, she strikes. And her countermove, as insiders reveal, wasn't just about denying the rumors of an inappropriate relationship with her bodyguard. It was about flipping the script entirely, turning herself from the accused into the accuser, from the whispered subject of scandal into the loudest, most commanding voice in the room. Here's the thing about Meghan. She understands the media better than the monarchy ever did. She knows how to weaponize her story, how to shift public perception, how to make herself not just the center of attention, but the victim of persecution. And in this case, that's exactly what she did. Behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly began warning Harry of the consequences of turning against her. She reminded him of everything she claimed to have endured, the racism, the tabloids, the palace's coldness. She painted herself as the woman under siege, the woman who sacrificed everything only to be hounded again. If you let them define this narrative, she would say, then they've won. And we've lost everything. Do you see the strategy? She wasn't just denying the bodyguard rumors. She was reframing them as part of the bigger persecution story. And in doing so, she put Harry in a chokehold of loyalty. Because how could he abandon her when she cast herself as the eternal victim? But Meghan's countermove didn't stop with emotional manipulation at home. She had other weapons. Whispers began that she hinted at having leverage, damaging recordings, emails, even so-called insurance files. The suggestion was clear. If the palace or the press pushed too far, if anyone dared to smear her beyond repair, she had the ability to strike back with secrets that could devastate not only the monarchy, but Harry himself. Imagine the tension in those conversations. A wife hinting that she holds the nuclear codes to her husband's family. Was it real? Or was it bluff? No one could say for sure. But the threat itself was enough to send a chill through anyone listening. Now think about this. Meghan had already mastered the art of using interviews as weapons. Oprah, Netflix, magazine covers. Each time, she controlled the stage, controlled the message, and controlled Harry's role as her supporting actor. So, when the bodyguard rumors loomed, what better move than to prepare yet another narrative? Not about betrayal, but about resilience. Not about scandal, but about a woman fighting back against lies. The brilliance of this strategy was that she didn't even have to mention the bodyguard directly. By folding it into her larger, persecuted Duchess narrative, she made the rumor seem like just another unfair attack. And to her supporters, that was enough. But here's the darker layer. According to those close to the couple, Meghan didn't just fight back against the palace or the press. She turned her countermove inward, toward Harry himself. In moments of bitter argument, she allegedly reminded him of what he stood to lose. His family, already gone. His royal identity, already shattered. His reputation, hanging by a thread. The only thing he had left was her, and if he continued doubting her, even that would vanish. Imagine hearing those words from the woman you gave everything up for. The woman who now threatened to leave, to take it all with her, unless you fell back in line. Let me ask you, was this love, or was it leverage? Was Meghan protecting herself from lies, or protecting herself from the truth? And here's where the palace's fears suddenly made sense. Meghan wasn't just fighting for her image. She was fighting to control the entire narrative of the royal family. Because if she could position herself as the victim once more, if she could cast doubt on every accusation, if she could remind Harry that survival meant loyalty, then the bodyguard rumors would become just another conspiracy theory, a footnote in the Meghan Markle saga. But the problem with countermoves is that they often create new enemies. Meghan's defiance, her constant narrative shaping, didn't just silence critics. It enraged them. Courtiers saw her as dangerous. Insiders whispered that she was blackmailing the institution itself. Even Harry's few remaining allies began to drift away, uneasy at the thought of a duchess wielding secrets like weapons. And when allies turn into enemies, leaks are inevitable. Because here's the twist. Meghan might have silenced Harry for the moment. She might have reframed the scandal as just another smear. But she couldn't silence everyone. And soon, another betrayal, this time from someone even closer, would rip the carefully crafted counter-narrative apart. Because when those closest to Meghan began speaking out, her defense strategy would collapse in ways she never imagined. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Trust is the glue that holds every marriage together. Without it, love erodes, loyalty cracks, and everything built on that foundation begins to crumble. For Harry and Meghan, trust had been fragile from the start. Tested by the press, strained by the palace, worn down by the relentless circus of fame. But after the bodyguard rumors, after Harry's whispered confession, after Meghan's countermove and the palace's fury, that fragile trust finally collapsed. And what followed wasn't just the breakdown of a marriage. It was the slow-motion implosion of a partnership that had once promised to change the monarchy forever. Imagine the atmosphere inside their home. On the surface, they were still the glamorous couple, red carpets, interviews, carefully staged photographs of domestic bliss. But behind closed doors, a battlefield. Every conversation laced with suspicion. Every look carrying unspoken accusation. Harry's doubts simmering, Meghan's defenses sharpening, both of them caught in a cycle that neither could escape. Can you picture it? The kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. The kind of arguments where nothing gets resolved, only buried, deeper and deeper. Harry was no longer just angry. He was hollow. Friends described him as withdrawn, pacing, endlessly replaying photographs and whispers in his mind. He had defended Meghan so fiercely, cut off his family for her, isolated himself from friends who questioned her, and yet here he was, doubting the very woman he had sacrificed everything for. It's the kind of torment that eats a man alive. Do you think he ever lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, asking himself, did I make the greatest mistake of my life? And Meghan? Meghan doubled down on control. If Harry's trust was wavering, she wasn't about to let him pull away. She projected strength, composure, resilience. Publicly, she was radiant. Privately, she pushed harder, demanding loyalty, demanding silence, demanding that Harry bury his doubts for the sake of their brand, their survival. To her, the bodyguard rumor was just another battle in a long war against the press and the palace. But for Harry, it wasn't just another rumor. It was the seed of doubt that poisoned everything else. Here's the tragedy. The collapse of trust didn't just affect their marriage. It infected every part of their lives. Friends stopped visiting. Staff quit in droves. Even business partners grew wary, whispering about instability behind the scenes. Every deal, every project, every public appearance carried the shadow of their crumbling relationship. Because when trust dies inside a marriage, it leaks outward. And soon, everyone can feel it. Now think about the irony. Harry had always believed he was breaking free from the palace to protect his wife, to create a life built on honesty and authenticity. And yet, in California, far from Buckingham Palace, far from the tabloids of London, he found himself live.